So this episode is about you as a parent gearing up for what's going to happen when things start shifting for your kid, right? So we're going to talk about conflict, and we're going to talk about why are we fighting for something, because tackling anxiety is a challenge. It's really tough.
Welcome back to Raising Resilience, 25 tips for parenting your child with anxiety or OCD. I'm Dr. Josh Spitalnick, practice owner of Anxiety Specialists of Atlanta. I'm a licensed psychologist, board certified in cognitive behavioral therapy. And I have with me my co-author and colleague, Marti Munford, licensed professional counselor.
So Josh, let's dive in. We're going to talk about tip number 8. Conflict.
Do you want to fight about this tip? We can duke it out right now.
I mean, I'm going to try to de-escalate.
You de-escalate. I'll sit here and just be grumpy then. What's tip number 8 all about?
Conflict is inevitable. Sorry, guys.
Oh, man.
Bad news, right? Your job as a parent is not necessarily to prevent conflict. It's actually just to de-escalate it. Sometimes even just sidestep it.
We know that anyone with anxiety and OCD likes solutions, rules, finality, certainty. And unfortunately, conflict sort of falls into that trap, which is that conflict, no matter what it's about, no matter how long it lasts, no matter who's to blame, always ends.
Yeah.
Doesn't always end well, doesn't always end nicely. Sometimes it ends with a hug and a handshake, sometimes with tears. Often for our kids, it ends with amnesia. They forget all about it. And we're like, what the heck? What just happened there? But conflict always ends, and from an anxiety standpoint, there's kind of a weird reward mechanism that happens when the dust is settled, conflict's over, and the kid moves on, and you're like, wait, but we're not done yet. And so we have to be preparing you as caregivers to be prepared for that moment of conflict and what the heck you're supposed to do about it.
Again, I'm going to try to find a way to connect to this in every video. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay that they're mad, right? Sometimes with anxiety, we're talking about either pushing them into moments that feel very scary, but safe, right? Sometimes it means them having to do things that feel really uncomfortable for them, but are responsibilities that we know help them long term, right? So the sign of them being frustrated, irritated, activated is not the sign that something is wrong. Being able to let stuff go in those moments helps you kind of keep your eye on the prize. What's the most important thing here?
But if you think about what anxiety or OCD is to your child, it's sort of this outside character, this third party in their head or outside, kind of bullying them. And at some point when they find themselves being the victim of this entanglement of stress and anxiety and yuckiness and fear and dread, they've got to do something with it. And who's the most natural, likely recipient of that? Parents. I mean, that's where it's going to go. Most of our kids keep their stuff together during the school day, and they come home and thrash on us emotionally, verbally, sometimes physically. And so just be mindful that when they're feeling physiologically or neurochemically imbalanced and don't know what to do with it, we are the inevitable punching bags. And how do you step aside from that and teach them how they don't need to be the punching bag to their anxiety or internal angst as well?
Yeah. So again, it comes to this idea of how am I showing up in these tough moments, and what do I want them to get out of it? And so when it comes to conflict, what I'm always trying to get parents to focus on is you are on the same team and you're fighting the same enemy, kind of like you were saying, this worry, bully, monster thing that's making your kid's life so difficult. The easiest way for it to feel more finite is for it to be about parent versus kid. And that's just a lose-lose.
Your only job in this moment, is to de-escalate. You can punish later, you can teach later, you can hug later or now, you can comfort them later or now, but in the moment, the only job in conflict, especially with a child who's high emotionality, is to de-escalate it. Let that brain rest, let that brain calm down, because the kid's telling you in that moment they can't.
I like to teach parents just to be able to sit there and track. This kind of goes back to play therapy, being able to say, you're really mad. You're really upset. You wish I did something differently. You wish the school did something differently. You wish this was going differently. You wish you could control the situation, right? When you can be present with your kid without having to control their behavior in that moment, without having to control all the external circumstances, you are able to be on the same team with them. And again, just sort of step to the side, not taking the bait to make it about you versus them.
This one point here, number 9, don't forget number 9, I think is maybe the most important thing for any parent, whether you get to see a therapist like Marty and I are not, which I hope you do, specifically an anxiety specialist, is education is key. We cannot emphasize this point enough. When parents come in and say either fix my kid, here's my kid, or like fix us, teach us the skills, give us the intervention, teach us breathing. I know what you want, we know what you want, and we want to take all that pain and suffering and anguish away. But actually the first intervention is literally learning the ins and outs of what it means to have anxiety. And you might know that as a parent, but your kid might not. So we're talking about the basics of anxiety. We're talking about false alarms, biology, disordered thinking, confusion, fear, what symptoms are, what bothers your kid, what bothers you, the basics of that, which some people in our work might call assessment, gathering information, and then us teaching sort of the ins and outs of what that problem area is, whether it's about separation anxiety or fear of throw up or public speaking or OCD. Knowing the ins and outs of those symptoms, I can't emphasize enough. Education, which we call psychoeducation in therapy, weird word, is everything.
Josh and I will harp on this again and again and again because there is a tendency to try to get to a doing. What do I do? Yep. And so much of progress and getting better is actually in the not doing, right? And it's interesting, if you think back to one of our original goals of this document, it is to make more access to information for people so they never need treatment. And there are a lot of people that find tremendous growth just by knowing and labeling and putting words to what they're experiencing, right? So psychoeducation cannot be skipped, especially when we're talking about doing scary stuff, right? People need to know, why are we doing this, right?
And then we get into the next real critical piece here, which is really, what is your why? What is the purpose of coming to therapy?
When we are taking all that psychoed, we're preparing for conflict, the next most important thing is that we have to know why we are doing this. This work is too difficult to do without a purpose. As humans, we don't do anything without having a really big why.
And I know that people come to therapy to make yucky go away. I use yucky for every population. Make yucky go away. That is half of what a therapist should be doing. And if you don't get to see a therapist, from a parent's perspective, that's half of your goal in teaching your child a new way to be. The other half is filling that bucket or boat with loving things. So what is your why? I hope it's more than just making the anxiety go away. It should be replacing with something that's more life-affirming, more values-based. And we're going to talk about it also in future episodes.
Right? And so the biggest challenge, and this I would say is maybe one of the biggest ways that the work I do diverges if I'm working with an adult versus working with a kid. Because your vision for why for your kid might look very different than theirs. Because the truth is, anxiety loves to make their world small. And your job as a parent is to make their world as big as possible, give them as many opportunities as possible. And sometimes that anxiety is so strong that they don't have that same vision, right? So I always ask kids, to you, what's the best solution? And sometimes they'll tell me, like, if mom would just sleep in my bed every night, like, this all goes away, right? And that's tough. They don't have the why that you do. So you're gonna have to figure out what's your vision for them to tolerate all the messiness that comes with it.
That why is critical. And we're here to talk about really putting the package together, Marty, as we're teaching parents to find a new way to interact with their children who have anxiety and OCD. Be ready for conflict. Know that all the things you're learning with us and all the things you read about, they are critical, they have a piece, and it is the first part of everything you make decisions on. It's a critical part of the plan. But why? What are you fighting for? Who are you doing it with? And really, what's the end game? What's the ultimate goal that you have here? And if you have those in place, I think you have a pretty good starting process of learning a new way to be resilient and teach resilience to your child with anxiety or OCD.
Thanks for joining this episode talking about tips 8, 9, and 10, all that prep work that we want to take on before we get started doing the hard stuff, right? So thanks for being here. If you like what we're putting out, please feel free to like, subscribe, and follow along for the rest of the series. Thanks for joining us for what episode is this?
This is episode 4.
Okay. Thanks.
Can't I pay someone to deal with the conflict?
You cannot.
Man.
Yeah.
So
definitely would not have had children if there wasn't a good why, right? It's too hard. It's too much. We have to have a good why.